A baby was left on the church steps in 1972. In 2022, her DNA matched a missing nun. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for taking time not just to watch, but to take care of the body that's carried you this far. Sometimes the truth waits in silence. It hides in walls, in whispers, in records no one bothers to open. And when it finally surfaces, it doesn't shout. It trembles, quiet but undeniable, like a candle flickering in a long-forgotten room. That's what happened to Sarah Keller the day her DNA test lit a match in the dark. It had started as a Christmas gift, one of those popular DNA kits. Her husband Mark had wrapped it in bright gold paper and tucked it beneath the tree with a card that read, "To the woman who wants to know everything." She'd laughed. He knew her too well. Sarah had always been curious about ancestry, history, the roots beneath the surface of things. It was just for fun, she'd told herself. Weeks later, in early January, the results pinged her inbox. She opened them in the kitchen, coffee in hand, sunlight pooling across the counter like spilled cream. Ethnicity breakdown, familiar enough. Matches, some distant cousins, no surprises. But one name at the top blinked back at her. Close maternal match. Mary Celeste, born 1943, disappeared 1972, status missing. Sarah froze. The name sounded like a ghost ship. A missing woman, a nun. She clicked through the file. Mary Celeste, Sister Mary, last seen at St. Bridget's Convent in Chicago, spring of 1972. Officially listed as missing. Case closed decades ago. She felt her throat tighten. Her mother, her real mother, was a missing nun? It didn't make sense. Sarah had grown up in Arizona, raised by the Kellers. Good people. She'd always known she was adopted, but it had been a closed case. No questions, no answers. Just the warm kindness of a couple who wanted a daughter and the silent permission to never look back. But this wasn't something she could unsee. She brought the laptop to Mark, her hand trembling. He read the page, then looked up at her like the room had shifted. "You think she's—" I matched to her. A 49.8% DNA match. That's parent level. Mark leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. But she's been missing for 50 years. Sarah swallowed hard, which means I was born, right before she vanished. They sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Something vast and cold opened beneath her ribs. She began researching. Newspaper clippings, parish bulletins, diocesan records. It took her weeks. Late nights with coffee gone cold, her laptop glowing in the dark like a confession booth. She traced the name Mary Celeste through archives and old microfilm scans. Photos surfaced, black and white, grainy. A young woman in a veil, smiling gently. Eyes that looked too much like Sarah's. The convent had reported her disappearance in April 1972. The statement was brief. Sister Mary failed to return from an afternoon walk. Foul play is not suspected. But no one searched. No one followed up. There was only the silence that often followed women who disappear in religious spaces. Neat, quiet, folded away. Until now. Sarah drove to Chicago in early spring. Windshield streaked, with thawing sleet. The convent was still there, though the nuns had aged or gone. The current staff let her walk the grounds. The stone steps, the gravel paths, the rusted bell. It felt hollow. She tried to picture her mother here, young, pregnant, hidden beneath layers of ritual and rule. At the city records office, a kind woman named Deb helped her search birth records. Nothing under Sarah's name in 1972, but Deb leaned in, eyes narrowing. Sometimes, she said, babies abandoned at churches were logged under a date or location code. You ever hear of a church connected to your story? Sarah hesitated. Her adoptive mother had once mentioned something. They said you were found outside St. Anthony's. Just a whisper. A bedtime story that never repeated. Deb typed, clicked. There it was. Female infant, no name. Left at steps of St. Anthony's, April 10th, 1972. No witnesses. Wrapped in a gray wool cloth. Umbilical cord still attached. Sarah covered her mouth. Deb placed a soft hand on hers. I think you found your beginning. But the question remained, why had Sister Mary disappeared? And how had a nun, cloistered and bound by vow, ended up pregnant? Sarah returned to the convent, this time with more direct questions. An older nun named Agnes agreed to speak. Agnes remembered Mary. She was gentle, always humming, always out in the gardens. Was she ever in trouble? Agnes's gaze drifted to the stained glass. There were rumors that she'd gone quiet, that the Mother Superior kept her from taking final vows. And then, one day, she was just gone. Sarah's voice broke. Did anyone know she was pregnant? The silence that followed felt centuries old. Agnes finally nodded. There were whispers. But in those days, a scandal like that could bury a whole house of God. The church was afraid. They made things disappear. Sarah stood outside the convent afterward, her breath fogging the cold air. The stones beneath her feet, the ivy curling along the walls. They had seen everything and told nothing. Her mother had been hidden by silence, erased by shame. And yet, she had left her. Not in a dumpster, not in the dark, but on the steps of a church, a place where someone would find her, feed her, save her. Sarah sat in her car and cried until the windshield steamed. Then she looked at her reflection in the glass. Older, weathered, but clearer somehow. Like the story of who she was had finally begun to speak. She reached into her bag and pulled out the DNA match again. There, beneath the name Mary Celeste, was a button. View maternal relatives. She clicked. 2 names appeared, and one of them was still alive. It wasn't the discovery itself that haunted Grace, but the silence that followed it. The moment she walked out of the testing center that spring afternoon in 2022, the world felt both sharper and less real. The air outside still held the gentle warmth of March in Boston. Bare trees, cautious sunlight, but inside her, something vast had just split open. She had only done the DNA test because of a friend's suggestion. Curiosity, she'd told herself. It might be fun to find a cousin or two. What she hadn't expected was the message that popped into her inbox 3 weeks later. A close maternal match has been identified. Estimated relationship, mother. Grace didn't have a name to pair with that alert. just a match ID and a soft-voiced email from the testing company saying that her match was marked as deceased in public record. But the kicker, the detail that stopped her breath like ice down her back, was the match's name, Sister Mary Joanna. She stared at the screen for minutes, fingers still poised above her coffee cup. A nun. The name read like a bell toll, Sister Mary Joanna. The system had even attached a grainy black and white photo from an archived Catholic newsletter dated 1971. A young woman in a veil, her face half turned from the camera, eyes lifted as if listening to something distant. Grace had never seen her before, and yet something inside her stirred. She sat there for hours. The coffee went cold. She reread the email again and again. Deceased, none, missing. The testing platform linked to a few public records, including a case file from 1972. Person of interest, Mary Joanna Carroll, reported missing from St. Annalise Convent, Pennsylvania. Grace's chest tightened. She didn't know what to do with that information. Her whole life, she'd been told she was abandoned, left in a blanket on the steps of St. Catherine's Church in Pittsburgh. A kind janitor had found her before sunrise. The police had opened a case, but no one came forward. No notes, no phone calls, just a baby, barely days old. Grace had been adopted by a loving couple. They gave her a home, a name, a life filled with safety and structure. She had never asked too many questions about her biological parents. Maybe she was afraid of what the answers might be. But now, staring at the screen, the question felt unbearable. What happened to a nun in 1972 that ended with a baby, her, abandoned outside a locked church door before dawn? That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Did anyone know? Did the church know? She pulled up articles about missing nuns. There were only a few. Most led nowhere. Just half-hearted police searches, brief mentions in diocesan newsletters, and silence. But Sister Mary Joanna was different. There were rumors. One archived local paper mentioned inconsistencies in her records. Another whispered about a pregnancy scandal within the convent, hushed up by the Mother Superior. The deeper Grace went, the more disturbing it became. She found an old, scanned letter, never formally published, written by a former novice at St. Annalise. It was brittle, typed, and angry. It claimed Sister Mary Joanna disappeared overnight, and that someone heard crying in the laundry wing just days before. Grace's hands trembled as she read. She knew she couldn't let it go. The next morning, she called the archivist listed on the convent's historical page. A man named Deacon Leo answered, his voice steady but guarded. When Grace explained who she was and what she'd found, there was a long pause. "We've had inquiries before," he said, "but if your DNA matches Sister Joanna, then you might be the first one with real proof." He agreed to meet her. A week later, she was in a car, driving through rural Pennsylvania, fields rolling by like tired waves. She parked beside a stone building, nestled among hills. St. Annalise looked more like a monastery than a convent, silent, weather-worn, steeped in unspoken rules. Deacon Leo greeted her at the gate. He was older than she expected, white hair, soft hands. He led her to a private office where boxes of records were stacked, like gravestones of forgotten truths. He didn't say much at first, just watched her with a quiet kind of respect. "I knew Sister Joanna," he finally said. "She was different, gentle, brilliant, but something changed in the winter of '72. She stopped singing. She kept to herself. Then one morning she was gone." He opened a folder. Inside were handwritten notes. One stood out. Mary J. reported ill, confined to quarters, no visitors. Dated February 14th, 1972. A second note, dated 2 weeks later. Mother Superior declared her transferred. No documentation filed. Sisters not permitted to ask further. Grace read the notes over and over. The room swam. She was pregnant, she said, her voice catching. Deacon Leo looked at her, his eyes heavy. "That's what we've suspected for years, but no one ever confirmed it. And the church didn't want scandal. A baby born to a nun? It would have been buried, quietly, deeply." Grace sat back, heart hammering. She wasn't just a secret. She was someone's silence. But that silence was breaking. In a locked drawer, Leo pulled out an old, sealed envelope. It had her name on it. "Your mother left this," he said. "It was never supposed to be opened unless someone came asking." Grace's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single page. "My beloved Grace, I prayed they would tell you, but I see now they never will. I loved you from the moment I felt you stir. They said I couldn't keep you, that God required obedience more than love, but God felt close when you kicked, not when they took you. Forgive me. Find your name. Live fully." The signature was faded, but it was real. And Grace read it again and again, until her tears blurred the ink into something that looked like rain. The letter didn't end anything. It only deepened the wound. For the next 3 nights, Grace barely slept. She lay in her hotel bed staring at the ceiling, hearing that voice. Not her mother's real voice, because she had never known it, but the imagined rhythm of the words from the letter. God required obedience more than love. The sentence echoed like a hammer against stained glass. She returned to the convent archives the next morning, her eyes red, her breath shaky but determined. Deacon Leo greeted her again, this time with a softness that didn't feel like pity. It felt like reverence. He didn't ask if she was ready. He simply led her back to the storage room and pulled another box from the shelf. "This one contains incident reports and private communications from the Mother Superior at the time," he said. "Many were never meant to be seen." Grace hesitated before opening it, her fingers brushing the dust from the lid like she was disturbing a grave. Inside, the first file was labeled Confidential, FEB 1972, Ms. Joanna Carroll. She flipped through its yellowing pages and stopped at a handwritten entry dated February 2nd, 1972. "Sister Joanna continues to refuse confession. Her behavior is increasingly erratic. She has become withdrawn and fragile. I suspect illness or emotional compromise." Another note, later that same week. "She will not eat. Her garments appear altered. I confronted her gently. She said nothing. But there are signs. A fullness in the face. Heaviness in her gait. The other sisters whisper. We must intervene quietly before scandal ripples outward. And then, finally, An entry dated March 1st. The matter is resolved. Arrangements have been made for the child to be placed without trace. Sister Joanna will be listed as transferred for health retreat. Her presence must be scrubbed from public record. Grace's eyes stung. She could feel heat rising to her temples. They erased her mother like she was a stain, like she had sinned by loving. They wrote her out, she whispered, barely audible. They rewrote her story without asking if she wanted to disappear. Leo sighed. That was the way, back then. The church cared about order, not justice. Image, not humanity. Grace nodded slowly, but the silence between them stretched like an ache. Eventually, she stood, clutching the letter to her chest, and asked the question she had avoided all morning. Where is she buried? Leo's mouth tightened. She isn't. A pause. We never found her. Officially, Sister Joanna was never declared dead, but she vanished. No body, no funeral, no resolution. Only whispers. Grace felt her knees wobble, her throat dry. So she could still be out there? She would be in her 70s now. If she survived whatever happened then, she might still be alive. That idea, dizzying, absurd, and beautiful, clung to Grace's chest like a heartbeat. Her mother might not be a memory. She might be walking, breathing, somewhere still carrying the weight of what she gave up. That night, Grace didn't return to her hotel. She drove 4 hours west to the only name that had ever appeared alongside Sister Joanna's in the old letters, Sister Eloise. The two had entered the convent together, trained together. Their names appeared on liturgical records, shared choir duties. But by 1974, Sister Eloise had left the order, citing personal crisis of vocation. Now, she lived in a nursing home in a small Ohio town. The building was beige and quiet, a humming kind of quiet, filled with soft television sets and nurses with tired smiles. When Grace introduced herself at the front desk, they nodded like they'd seen this kind of search before, as if the ghosts of the past wandered in every so often, hoping for witnesses. Sister Eloise, now just Mary Eldridge, sat by a window feeding birds. She was frail, her hands thin and blue-veined, but her eyes lit up with curiosity as Grace approached. I'm looking for someone, Grace said softly. Her name was Sister Joanna Carroll. Mary blinked once, then again. She reached for her water glass, but didn't drink it. Why? She asked, voice brittle but precise. I think she might be my mother. Mary didn't react immediately. She looked past Grace, toward the bird feeder outside the window. They said she died, she murmured. But you didn't believe them, Grace said. Mary turned her eyes back to Grace, slower this time. No, she admitted. I never did. Because when they took the baby, they didn't tell her where they were sending her. She screamed. That's the last time I saw her, screaming in the laundry room. And then, silence. Grace sat down slowly, knees weak, heart racing. She screamed. Mary nodded. They told us she was unstable, that God was testing her, that she had been chosen to carry a burden and then let it go. But they punished her for loving too much. They said that her soul had to be corrected. So they erased her. Grace's voice cracked. What happened to her? I don't know, Mary said. I truly don't. One day she was gone. And then nothing. Grace swallowed hard, the tears rising. I have her letter, she said, unfolding the fragile paper. She named me Grace. She said she felt God closest when I kicked. Mary's lips trembled. She used to press her hand against her belly and hum hymns, she said. She believed he hadn't forsaken her. Only people had. They sat together for nearly an hour, talking, remembering a woman neither of them really knew, but both had lost. When Grace finally stood to leave, Mary pressed a small item into her palm. It was a rosary, old, worn, with a single missing bead. She used to carry this, Mary said, even when they told her not to. She said prayer was the only place she felt real. Grace nodded, her voice gone. She closed her hand around the rosary like it was a pulse. As she stepped back into the wind outside the nursing home, she realized something. She didn't know if she would ever find her mother's face in the flesh, but she had found the outline of her. The fight, the warmth, the ache, and that would have to be enough for now. But then her phone buzzed. An unknown number, a voicemail. The transcription read, "Hi, I think you might be looking for me. I'm sorry, this is hard to say, but I saw your post online about Sister Joanna. I have something she left behind. Please call me." Grace stared at the screen, breath caught in her throat. Her mother might not just be a story. She might be waiting. The voicemail played in her ears over and over. A woman's voice, trembling but steady, young yet weathered, like someone used to holding in too much. Grace listened 5 times before she could even write the number down. She called back that night from her car, parked outside a diner off the highway. The cold air filtered in through a cracked window, and her breath fogged slightly as the phone rang once, twice. "Hello?" The voice was real. "This is Grace. You left a message about Sister Joanna?" A pause. Then the sound of a shaky exhale. "Yes, my name is Clara. I'm sorry if this is strange, but I didn't know who else to talk to. I work at a church in Pennsylvania. We found something. A box. It had her name on it." Grace felt her spine straighten. "What kind of box?" "It's old, dusty, hidden behind a false wall in the rectory basement. We were renovating and I guess someone didn't want it found. It has letters, notes, and a photograph of a baby. The name Grace is written on the back." The world stopped for a breath. "Can I see it?" Grace asked, barely above a whisper. "I thought you'd ask that," Clara said. "Come tomorrow. I'll wait." The drive took nearly 5 hours. Trees blurred past her like ghosts, and every roadside chapel made her wonder, had her mother passed through here once? On foot? Alone? Grace didn't know what she expected. Maybe an ending. But what she found was a beginning. The church stood on a quiet hill, unremarkable, white brick, with ivy curling near the foundation. But as Grace stepped inside, the scent of wax and wood filled her lungs and steadied her. Clara was waiting in the narthex, a young woman in her 30s, eyes tired, but kind. "I kept it locked in the sacristy," she said. "Didn't want anyone else touching it." They walked down a narrow hallway, past framed portraits of former pastors. Then through a door behind the altar into a small room lined with vestments and relics. Clara unlocked a drawer, reached in, and pulled out a simple shoebox. When Grace opened it, her fingers trembled. There were at least 24 letters, all dated between 1970 and 1972, all addressed to "My Little Miracle." She read the first one aloud. voice cracking. I felt your heartbeat today, and for a moment I forgot the rules. I forgot the shame. You're more real to me than the cross around my neck. Each letter bled with love and pain, the quiet panic of someone trying to hold light inside a locked room. Grace read until her eyes blurred. Then she saw the photo. A baby swaddled in a crocheted blanket. A single note on the back. Grace, March 3rd, 1972. May the angels carry you farther than I ever could. Her fingers tightened around it, and for the first time in days, she cried. Real tears. Not of confusion, but of recognition. She had seen that blanket before, in a trunk her adoptive mother kept in the attic. Always assumed it was hers. But now it meant something else entirely. Where did this come from? She asked to Clara. I don't know exactly, Clara said. There's one more thing. I almost didn't show you. She pulled out a thin diary. The last entry, scrawled and uneven, read, They told me she's gone. Taken to a family better equipped. They won't say where. I am to leave in the morning. They think I'm broken, but I'm awake now. I remember everything. I will find her, even if it takes the rest of my life. Grace closed the diary slowly. She didn't give up, she whispered. She was still looking. The silence between them felt sacred. And then Clara hesitated. There's more. A man came through here 2 years ago, asking about a sister Joanna. He was older, maybe 70. Said he thought she had lived in this area. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But now, Grace's heart caught. What did he look like? Tall, pale, quiet. But his hands shook when he said her name. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out the rosary Sister Eloise had given her. Was he wearing this? Clara blinked. Yes, around his wrist. A piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Her mother wasn't the only one who had searched. Someone else had tried, maybe even found clues. Maybe someone loved her mother, or remembered her, long after the world stopped saying her name. Grace looked down at the photo again. She was wrapped in a blanket, her eyes half closed, a smudge of ink on her cheek. And then something clicked. She took out her phone, pulled up the digitized baptism photo from her original search. St. Emery's, 1972. A scanned image from the sacramental registry. In the margins, she had never noticed it before. A note scribbled faintly in red ink beside the entry for March 5th, 1972. Infant Grace, no surname given. Mother presumed deceased, placed under emergency care. Grace's hands went cold. They had assumed Joanna was dead, which meant no one had looked for her, because they thought there was no one left to be found. But Joanna had survived, somehow, somewhere, and she had carried this loss alone. Grace stood slowly. I need to find the man who asked about her. Clara nodded. I'll check the parish guest book. As Clara rummaged through old sign-in logs, Grace stepped outside, the cold air slicing across her cheeks. Her fingers traced the edge of the photograph. She looked up at the church spire, watched a crow land on the cross at the top. She was standing in the shadow of a life that had never been allowed to fully exist. But now the past was breathing again. And as Clara came running back out, waving a page, Grace knew this wasn't the end. His name was Peter Hale, Clara called. He left a phone number. Grace took the paper, her heartbeat pounding. The story wasn't finished, and someone out there might hold the last thread. The name echoed in Grace's mind like a bell. Peter Hale. She stared at the number Clara had scribbled onto the back of a visitor log sheet. The ink had smudged slightly with time, but the digits were still legible, still reachable. She sat in her rental car with the paper trembling in her hand, her thumb hovering over the call button on her phone. For a moment, she hesitated. What would she even say? "Hi, my name is Grace. I think you knew a nun who might be my mother. I think you were looking for her too." It sounded like something from a movie, a desperate monologue whispered into a payphone on a rainy night. But this wasn't fiction. This was her life, her blood, her history. She hit call. One ring, two, a pause, then, "Hello?" A man's voice. Rough, but not unkind. There was a fatigue in it, like someone who hadn't slept well in years. "Hi, Mr. Hale? My name is Grace. I was at St. Mary's Church yesterday. They said you visited once, asking about someone named Sister Joanna." Silence. Then the man exhaled, like someone deflating slowly. "I did," he said, "but that was a long time ago. Why are you asking?" Grace gripped the steering wheel. "Because I think she's my mother." The pause stretched. "Where are you?" "About an hour from you, I think. I could drive to you. I need to know what you know." There was a long inhale on the other end, then a soft reply. "I'll put on a pot of coffee." Grace drove north into the Pennsylvania hills. The world outside was quiet, softened by early snow. As the GPS directed her down narrower and narrower roads, she found herself whispering small prayers under her breath. Not out of religion, but hope. Hope that whoever Peter Hale was, he could fill in the blanks of a story that had lived in silence for 50 years. His house was a modest one, tucked between two fir trees, with a chipped mailbox and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. He opened the door before she could knock. Tall, white-haired, his frame thin but still upright, with a sort of rigid dignity. His eyes were gray, deep-set, and as soon as he looked at her, she saw something flicker. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "You look like her," he said. Grace stepped inside. His living room smelled of dust and old books. Family photos lined the mantel, though none of them showed Joanna. He gestured toward the couch and handed her a mug of coffee, black, trembling slightly in his hands. "I was 18 when I met her," he began. "It was 1969. She was 23, quiet, kept to herself, but brilliant. She could read in 3 languages and played piano like she was born with it in her blood. She wasn't like the other sisters. There was a sadness in her, not weakness, just this constant ache. I saw it in the way she looked at the world, like it hurt to hope." Grace listened, motionless. "She taught music classes to children from the town," he continued. "That's how we met. I was volunteering. We weren't supposed to talk much, but one day I stayed late to help her clean up. And she smiled, just once. And that was enough." He set his mug down. She wasn't allowed to fall in love, but she did. Grace felt her breath catch. "I never asked her to leave the church," Peter said. She wouldn't have, but something happened. She disappeared one day in early 1972. No warning. Just gone. I went to the Mother Superior. She said Sister Joanna had been transferred. But the look in her eye, I knew she was lying. He reached for a small tin box on the side table, opened it. Inside were 3 letters. I wrote her, every week for 6 months. Never got a reply. Then one day, this came back. He handed Grace a yellowed envelope, unopened, marked Return to Sender. No such person. I thought maybe she'd died, he whispered. But then, in 1986, I got a call from someone who had worked at a convent near Boston. She said there had been a Sister Joe who looked like Joanna. Said she left suddenly after a crisis, and no one heard from her again. Grace opened her purse and pulled out the baby photo. She didn't die, she said softly. She had me, and someone took me away from her. Peter stared at the photo. His hands began to tremble harder. Oh my God, he whispered. You're real. She nodded, barely holding herself together. I found letters she wrote to me. She called me her miracle. Peter closed his eyes. A tear slipped free. She would have moved heaven and earth to find you. Maybe she tried. Maybe they didn't let her. They sat in silence, time breathing around them. Then Grace asked the question that had haunted her since Clara gave her the diary. Do you think she's still alive? Peter didn't answer right away. He looked down at his fingers, gnarled and pale. I used to think I'd feel it if she was gone, he said finally, like something in my bones would break. But I never felt that. I never stopped waiting. He stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulled down a thick file. These are newspaper clippings, private investigator notes. I've spent most of my life looking. I just didn't have a name for the child she lost, but now I do. Grace took the folder, her hands steady, despite the storm inside her. She had walked into this house hoping for answers. Instead, she found something more. A fellow seeker. Someone who had carried the same weight, hidden beneath years of dust and doubt. I'm not going to stop either, she said. If she's out there, we'll find her. Peter smiled, and for a moment, he looked years younger. I'd like that. As Grace stepped outside into the pale light of afternoon, she glanced at the trees swaying in the wind and felt something shift. Not an ending, not yet, but maybe, finally, a beginning. The airport terminal buzzed with the low hum of early morning travelers, suitcases rolling, intercoms echoing, the distant hiss of a coffee machine. But Grace didn't hear any of it. She sat by the window, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup, staring blankly at the tarmac beyond. Her flight to Boston would board in 20 minutes, but time felt strangely suspended. Peter Hale had insisted on driving her to the airport. He'd hugged her goodbye like a father would a daughter, gentle but firm, like letting go of something precious. He didn't say much, only placed a single photo in her hand before she stepped out of the car. A faded image of Joanna, young, in habit, eyes bright and sad all at once. I took this the last time I saw her, he had whispered. Find her. Now, seated alone at gate 17B, Grace stared at that photo like it held a map written in invisible ink. What haunted her most wasn't just that her mother had vanished. It was that someone had chosen for her to vanish. Someone, somewhere, had decided that Sister Joanna's story didn't deserve to continue, that her voice could be erased with silence. Grace had spent 35 years not knowing that voice existed. Now, She couldn't stop hearing it in the spaces between her own heartbeat. The plane boarded, lifted, and climbed into a sky streaked with winter light. As Boston unfurled below her, Grace pressed her forehead against the window and whispered under her breath, "Please, let there still be something left." St. Clair's Home for Women wasn't listed on Google Maps anymore. It had closed its doors in 1995 after allegations of improper record keeping and an anonymous tip about hidden pregnancies. The building still stood, abandoned on the outskirts of Cambridge, its brick exterior weathered and softened by moss. Grace parked across the street and approached the front steps. The main door had been boarded shut, but the side entrance was loose. She slipped inside, flashlight in hand. The scent hit her first: mildew, wood rot, and something else underneath. Memory, maybe. Peeling wallpaper lined the hallway. An old crucifix hung crooked on the wall near the nurse's station. Filing cabinets stood rusted and partially open, their contents long removed or scattered. It wasn't a place built for remembering. It was a place meant for forgetting. She moved slowly through the corridor, her footsteps echoing like questions. In the basement, she found a storage room, cluttered with cracked chairs, broken cribs, and a box labeled 1972. Her pulse quickened. Inside were intake forms, smudged ledgers, and a bundle of envelopes bound with a yellowing ribbon. One envelope bore a handwritten note: "Confidential, Sister Joanna D." Grace opened it with trembling hands. There it was, a medical record dated March 1972. Patient: Sister Joanna D., status pregnant. Delivery anticipated within 3 weeks. The form ended with a chilling line: "Mother requests anonymity. Infant to be placed with parish discretion." But the signature at the bottom didn't match Joanna's handwriting. Grace had spent hours reading her mother's diary entries, memorizing every curve of her letters. This was different. Sharper, cold, forged. Grace stumbled back, breath shallow. They hadn't just separated her mother from her child, they'd erased her will. Someone had pretended she chose this. Someone had stolen her story before it could even begin. In the corner of the box, beneath a stained baby blanket, she found a photograph. A nun in profile, bent slightly, as if caught mid-prayer. The date scrawled on the back: April 2nd, 1972. The day Grace had been born. So Joanna had been there. Held her, maybe. Prayed over her. And then vanished. Back in her hotel room, Grace spread the documents across the bed like pieces of a puzzle, missing its center. There were too many blank spaces. Too many silences. She needed help. She called Clara. "They forged her signature," Grace said, her voice shaking. "They made it look like she wanted to give me up, but she didn't." Someone covered it up. There was a pause. Then Clara spoke, voice tight. "I think I know who you need to talk to." The next morning, Grace found herself outside the home of Sister Annette Ruiz, retired now in her late 80s, living in a quiet suburb outside Worcester. Clara had reached her through old convent records. She had worked at St. Clair's in 1972. The same spring Joanna disappeared. The door creaked open slowly. Sister Annette's eyes were sharp despite her age, her face lined with stories. "You're Joanna's daughter," she said, without needing confirmation. "You have her eyes." Grace's throat tightened. "Please." she said. I just want to know what happened. Sister Annette nodded and stepped aside. She was terrified, she said, as they sat in the living room. Joanna came to me 2 weeks before she gave birth. She said she wanted to keep the baby. She begged me to help her leave the convent. I told her I'd try. Her voice cracked, but they found out. They said she'd shamed the order, that she needed to be moved. The last time I saw her, she was crying in the chapel. Then one morning she was just gone. Grace closed her eyes. They said she agreed to give me up. She never would have, Sister Annette said firmly. She fought for you until the last moment. Grace felt something inside her shatter and reform at once. Grief, relief, rage, all swirling together. I think they sent her somewhere no one would look. Annette's gaze dropped to her hands. There was a place, a retreat center in New Hampshire, for sisters in crisis. They said it was for rest, but I always thought it was more like exile. She scribbled an address onto a piece of paper. As Grace took it, Sister Annette touched her hand. She loved you. I want you to know that. She didn't abandon you. They took her from you. That night, Grace drove north under a sky swollen with stars. The forest grew thicker, the air colder. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew what she wouldn't do. She wouldn't stop. As the headlights lit the crooked sign by the road, St. Catharina's spiritual retreat, she slowed the car and whispered one word into the quiet. Mom?